I'll give you an IOU for now.
Hi everyone, I'm Jess. Welcome to 480. Tonight we're very lucky to have Mike and Karen here to talk about user experience. I'll run through a bit of housekeeping first. The male bathrooms are just over here behind us where the sign is. Female are around the other side of the building, pretty much in the same spot opposite the lifts. If you need to leave the building, let someone know because those doors will lock behind you and you won't be able to get back in. Pizza will be coming around 7:30, so make sure you hang around for that as well. A big thanks to our sponsors, Anchor for the venue, Reinteractive, who provide Ruby on Rails and JavaScript apps, and also General Assembly. And there's supposed to be PayPal as well. PayPal are paying for the drinks tonight, but Steve isn't here unfortunately, but thanks for the drinks. So AWIA, the Australian Web Industry Association, we have the Web Awards occurring later this year in September and the Nationals happening in November. If you know of a website who should be entered, or if you want to come along to the event, please let me know and I'll be able to sort that out for you. There's a stack of meetup groups that are associated with 480. If you know any of these people, feel free to have a chat to them and go along to one of these events. Otherwise, just speak with me and I'll put you in contact with them. Anchor, we're always looking for system administrators, also a technical account manager, customer service representative, and Haskell developers. If you know anyone who's looking for work, please let us know. Also, Reinteractive are always looking for Ruby on Rails developers. Speak with Chloe, who's sitting over there. Alright, I'll now hand over to Mike and Karen for the presentation. Thanks, guys.
Welcome. Great turnout. Thanks for coming out tonight. I want to talk tonight about UX research and design. Karen and I were going through various topics and things that we really want to share, things that might be beneficial to everybody. We were looking at who might be attending, who it is that we might be speaking with, and how important UX research and design is. And we thought we might be talking about UX research and design for product managers, also for developers, probably a lot of developers in the room. Designers, of course, producers, stakeholders. But really we want to talk about UX research and design for humans. That is the inclusive form of UX research and design, the UX research and design processes, theory, background, anecdotes, we all have stories, for the benefits, the endearing engagement that UX research and design can actually bring to any digital project, as well as the key insights that it gives us to really human behaviour with technology. That's something that I find quite fascinating. So a little bit about me. Probably I might start with Karen first.
I took that photo. That's me.
You're at the back of that camera. Karen, if I can just introduce Karen. Karen's, I've worked on a number of projects with her. I have introduced her in the past, and I tend to stick to the same theme that if there was ever a MacGyver of UX, it's Karen. If you ever need anything, a protractor, I don't even think they make protractors anymore. Karen will have one in her handbag. If you need Sharpies, if you need a lead pencil, not just a lead pencil, but you need a special 3B or 2B, Karen will probably have it in her handbag, and she's able to just pull it out, sticky tape, whatever it might be, post-it notes for our research items. Not that I want to make that everything about what she does, because she has some very, very really solid experience, particularly with research, observation of usability testing and design as well, and as an educator, but I might just give you to so it's better than what I have.
Don't take protractors together. So I've been in UX for about, well, it hasn't always been UX, the amount of time I've been in it, about 14 years. Started off as a VA and have worked my way up to teaching UX design with General Assembly. I've worked across desktop and mobile products, software and web. Probably the biggest and most exciting projects I worked on Kaching, Commonwealth Bank, so UX on that. Westfield Online, building an online shopping mall. They're probably two of the biggest, but worked with a lot with banks, finance companies, and government. So I'm working with Woolworths at the moment.
And a little bit about what you're working on now in terms of the offline.
Yeah, so the project I'm working on at the moment is where UX is in a really good space where we're starting to be brought on at the very beginning of the project rather than, can you come in, our website isn't working, can you come in and fix it for us? So the project that I'm on at the moment, we're in before anything has been looked at, anything's been touched, and the project scope is to look at what's the integration between a physical space and the digital space. So we're setting up a whole concept model that's based around exactly what customers want when they're engaging with Woolworths for both offline and online. So it's exciting because companies like Woolworths are starting to say, well, we need to think about the consumer right at the beginning.
Some of the themes that we'll touch on tonight reflect on some of the work you're doing. So we call that area service design. And we talk about experience design and all this type of thing, but what we're entering into the era at the moment is this space where it's not just about the user's interaction with the technology or whether the app has high user engagement, but it's the entire user experience. Anyone who's walked into some of the more niche banks are starting to realise that they're looking a little less like bank branches and they're more like lounges with iPads, and you no longer have tellers, you have customer service consultants, and only when you really need someone's help or someone come out in the office. That's all part of service design, and it's all what we call the customer experience realm, which includes our online experience and our offline experience. That's what we do. Woolworths obviously have the money to invest in that.
Yeah, and it's,
See, it's important.
the customer experience really is, it shouldn't be looked at in a silo, which is what we're trying to do. It's not, I'm engaging on the desktop or I'm engaging on mobile or I'm engaging with the brand. You're engaging with the brand.
A bit about me, yes, this was taken in Shanghai. That's me eating jellyfish. Not the band jellyfish, but the food jellyfish. That was the User Experience Professionals Association annual conference, and it was a very interesting time. We had Don Norman there, we had Jesse James Garrett learning about really their key insights and their experience with UX and interaction design. There's just some personal information for myself. I tend to tweet and blog about this stuff, and feel free to connect with me. How did I get here? My background is in psychology. I was planning on a career in psychology until .com hit, which gives you an idea of how old I am. And I then moved into consulting, to web technologies through senior management, and found myself managing a user experience team and spending a whole lot of time with the user experience team and no one else that I was in charge of. Finding I was enjoying myself way too much with them, and made the decision to actually leave and become a user experience researcher and designer. I was finding that a lot of the things that I enjoyed about psychology, there's perception, human performance, statistics, all of those things were actually quite relevant to design. Prior to that, looking after technologies, etc., knew that there was something about design and experience design that was mostly about the doing. And I think many of us still operate in a space where it's all about the doing. Show us what you've done. Show us what you're about to do. We don't care about that research stuff. We kind of trust that you know what you're doing, so just give us something. We'll tell you whether we like it or not. And often that starts to become an issue and can lead to milestones being set, etc. So the whole UX space really appealed to me, particularly about the measurement and how we can actually have a scientific background for why some designs are successful and others aren't. Which brings me to my current situation. Myself and business partner Russell Potts, we've started Xperity.com, and we're a full service 360 user experience design consultancy, and researchers and educators. We run courses and we do this stuff as well. Just us. So what is UX? I can tell you now, there's a lot of people on LinkedIn who've got UX in their title, and I've seen it appear quite a bit. It's sort of crept up, and it's rare to have seen those individuals. Nice put your
It's okay. It's fine.
I got criticised.
It was the big reveal, Mike. It was a big reveal.
We ran a course last weekend at York Street, and I didn't realise, because we had this small room in our training rooms, and I was sort of sitting in front of the projector, and my arms were getting in the way, and one of the guys at the back was like, "You keep getting in the way." I was like, I blame my mother, because she overfed me, so it's stretching across. When we talk about UX, what is UX? It's a term that seems to be really bandied about the place a lot. That's great UX, someone might say. They'll look at that website, oh, great UX. And, I'll sort of overhear these conversations and go, really, is that great UX? Why is that great UX? Because you like it? Because it makes you feel good? Why is it good UX? And we can often be confused by the various terms. I mean, we spoke to, last year we spoke to a recruitment agent, and we had about 10 recruiters in the room. I think we finally had enough of seeing these jobs out there. We said, look, we'd like to come and talk to you about what UX is and how it's not, UI, visual design, all these things. And we're great. So we went in there and we started to bring up ads on Seek. And some of them we saw were UX/UI/Flash developer. There was UX developer. I don't even know what a UX developer is. And so it's really important. So what is UX and why is it important to know? Is it UI design? We often confuse user experience with user interfaces. User interface is everything. User experience seems to be a far more abstract type of term. Is it like an online behaviour thing? What is it? Is it getting inside people's headspaces? All that. Is it that? It's a bit of a unicorn. And I always love to play this particular video. You haven't seen this already.
Today we know that chickens come from eggs, and eggs come from chickens. Then, when we venture back in time to establish how the first chicken laid the first egg, we get all confused figuring out where that chicken hatched from the previous egg before laying the first egg, to conclude that there was a chicken to lay the previous egg from the first egg that was laid by the first chicken. In the timeline of history, that's where the term BC comes from. Like 200 BC. Historians might say 217 BC, which sounds more accurate, meaning 217 years before chicken, and the first chicken. After that, it's AD, the abbreviation for Anno Domini. Anno means year in Latin, and Domini means of the egg. Interestingly enough, there is a direct correlation between the elucidation of the chicken and egg conundrum and the design of websites we like to use. Today we have a discipline called user experience design, which, just like BC, is abbreviated UX. UX design is the deliberate intent to make the experience of using a website enjoyable for you and me. So UX is like the chicken, and like the chicken lays an egg, UX spawns a user interface, abbreviated UI, which is the egg, dominus in Latin. Here's where the UX, chicken, and the UI, egg, get just as confusing historically, because to you and me, the user experience is established after we navigate the user interface. We'll say, I like this site, or what the this site sucks. That is called user feedback. Amongst professionals, that can also be passed off as a heuristic evaluation. Today, we are aware, if you've been paying any attention, that the design of the user interface we see, the egg, is the product of the design of the user experience, the chicken. But then to you and me, as users enjoying a website or yelling profanities at it, the user experience, the chicken, is the product of the user interface, the egg. And from our feedback is initiated the design of an improved user experience. So the egg hatches a chicken to lay a better egg. And it all starts over.
It's a pretty schmaltzy video, right? There's lots of questionable things, I think, but I think what I like about it is that it really simplifies the whole UI versus UX. Not only do we see confusion in job titles, but we actually see confusion in really semantics between a user interface and the overall user experience. And it's often something that gets confused where I've seen, LinkedIn really is an online, I don't want to refer to it too much, but it's an online area where we congregate as professionals. And there's been posts from individuals saying, this site has great UX, or user experience designers and developers and lead developers and lead designers must now start to get a little, inverted commas, UX on their portfolio. And I've looked at the stuff and gone, what the hell does getting UX on your portfolio really mean? And I think it's just a case of people not understanding what the term might be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, you get a real misunderstanding. Whereas I think this video, whilst it's pretty simple, is that UI is the thing, it's the interface, it's the product of user experience. But as we all know, with a poor user interface, the user experience can then be affected. Hence the circular argument, and it's not a bad way to start thinking about the whole idea of how UI affects UX, etc. But if it's not just UI, then what is it? Perhaps we can understand it by understanding the processes. Now, I tend to use this all the time. I tend to divide things into discrete groups to be able to explain them a bit better. The UX process that we all tend to follow, and some of you may be familiar with the whole learn, measure, build process. You may be involved in that in either standard methodologies or agile methodologies or whatever. But I tend to break down what we do into we research, we design, and then we validate or we test. They're the things that I'd like to concentrate on this evening and get Karen's insight as to how the processes can actually benefit all stakeholders in a group, whether the designers, developers, product managers, or product owners. So what do we research? Well, we research users. We research people. Sometimes this is an all too often neglected part of a project. I know when the global financial crisis hit, and I was in my second year of business as a user experience consultant, the first thing to be struck off the quotes that I was sending out was research. Oh, you know what to do, you've been doing this for a while, just give us what you think is best. We call that the best guess type of design. And I'd always come back with, yeah, that's great, but who are your users? Oh, we know who they are, we just need this and that changed. It's really hard to design without knowing who our users are. What do we want to know about them? We want to know who they are firstly. Who are the target audience groups? Are they mums, are they dads, are they kids, are they tradesmen? Do they have an account with us? Do they not have an account with us? That's basic stuff. How can we go and design any interface without knowing who it's for? What are they thinking? What are their needs? What are their questions? We have to know this stuff. What makes them happy? What makes them sad? What frustrates them? What delights them? Not just about computers and interfaces, but everything outside. Because we might be missing something, thinking that we're coming up with all these features, but there's something that actually would delight them that we totally and utterly missed. What's their smartphone usage? How often do they check Facebook a day? Do they post photos of food when they go to restaurants? Of things that they've created? Do they cook the perfect steak and then take a photo or get a selfie with the steak or whatever they do? What do they do with their phones? What's their social networking? Do they have kids? Do they have evil kids with no bodies? What are their travel habits? Where do they fly domestic? Do they use the lounge a lot? What do they do in the lounge? Where are they? It's kind of to know. We watch them, we observe them, and we want to find out what's going through, particularly in their thought processes as they do certain tasks, when they're buying something, when they're checking out. Why do they abandon that car? Because they just wanted to get a price? Or is it because there was something else that was in the way that was, acting as a distraction of some sort? We also research competitors. We look at the competitor landscape. What are the partnerships? How they're performing, and we weigh them up against each other. And what's the social landscape look like? What's happening on the web? What's happening environmentally? What's happening economically? They can all be things that would affect the way that we design, rather than just diving in there and design stuff. Which brings us to design. What do we design? We design information and we design interactions. Information design involves designing labels, the words that we see, the language, the structure, the organisation, the taxonomy. Navigation systems all come from information design. Content is still king. It's something that was a term that's been around for quite a while, the early CMS days, Jerry McGovern days, those of you who sort of remember late 90s, mid-90s even. Content is king. And I always like to think of, well, what would happen tomorrow if we all went back to 9600 baud modems? What would our websites look like? How would they function? Well, I'll tell you now, YouTube would probably go away. That'd become a very cumbersome thing. But the thing we'd start to focus on, again, is content. We can often get too caught up with the technologies and the animations and all the interactions that go on with that, without focusing on what the goals are of our users. And it's usually to do something or to know something or find something out. Content is still important, and which is why I think mobile design has helped us refocus on that, because we have these limited real estate screens. We have sort of, to a certain extent, limited bandwidth, where we don't want to be downloading the same things that are going on a desktop. And we started to refocus on what's important for those constraints.
I was just going to say, content for me, I still every now and then work on sites where even a client will say, just build templates. And if you just build templates for something and you don't look at the content, then you end up jamming the content in. So content's too small, that ends up being filled up with superfluous rubbish that people don't want. And the site devalues to users. So an analogy that we use quite often is to go back to traditional architecture. If you build a house for somebody not knowing who's going to live there, and the person who moves in is 6'7" tall, they might not be able to get through the doorways. Then the content, the house is the framework. You have to understand what the content is and what you're building it to, what you're building to hold. So,
And still a pretty important part of the process. I do remember probably 6 years ago I worked on a project for a global recruiting firm, and they brought in these experts, and these experts were creating these video blogs or vlogs, whatever you call them. And there was going to be, I think, 12 of them. Fantastic. These experts coming out of the woodwork, we tag them up. We have these, I think, 3-minute videos of them talking about the industry, the various industries that they're experts in. So we're perfect, we'll design a video wall. And so we did the content audit, had the video wall all ready to be designed. We were dealing with SharePoint designers as well who'd never been, so I think we had the triple whammy. We were dealing with SharePoint in its early phase. I know it's come a long way recently. That company was overseas, so they weren't next to us, and they never had experienced the user-centered design process or UX. So the challenges were there. What ended up coming back was firstly wireframes that when we submitted our wireframes, they came back looking very much like the wireframes, so they weren't used to actually being taking a lead from interaction designers. But the second thing was that the content frequency wasn't worked out. When we looked at the content strategy, we asked everything: where the content was from, who wrote it, how long it is, what's its format or type. One thing we didn't ask, and that was, what's the frequency of it being published? Because when we went to go live, there were 2 videos on my amazing video wall. I went, what's going on? He said, yeah, we're releasing them. We've got 12 videos, but we're releasing them once a month. We're going to just start off with 2. I said, well, my video wall looks pretty stupid now. So what are we going to do? So to quickly have to design up something to actually show one video, which will then just go to the next one. Content is really important. Knowing about that content, knowing not just what it is, what you're going to have, you may not have, how frequently is it going to be published, and is some of it private? Do we show half of it? Do they have to pay for it? All of those things are really important about design, and it's tricky when we're left to guess that stuff from the very start. So how do we design information? Sometimes we just have to look at the relationship of the content that we have. We look at, this is just a very basic entity relationship diagram that information architects, that's me by trade really, I've gone back and studied that, and I tend to love diving into content, trawling through, looking for relationships. Sometimes that helps us in how we might visualise our designs. But how do we make sense of it? Once we know what it is and once we've mapped it, we look at the relationships. We don't. See, in the user-centered design process, our users help us to make sense of it.
You can imagine how much fun it is when you're told you know how to talk to users.
We use techniques like card sorting. Card sorting is an important UX information design, whatever you want to call it, research technique. There's two types of card sorting that I typically use. We can have basic type of card sorting where we actually write down all of the content items that are destined for a website on cards, and we bring in, you guessed it, users. We don't bring in stakeholders. I had someone I trained 2 weeks ago call me in tears telling me that they were doing card sorting, they finally got it over the line, but the general manager wanted to do the early card sorting session because she felt that she would be able to organise all of the content. And she said, what do I do? What do I do? And I said, well, just get it over the line, wow her, and maybe she might then allow you to go and do it with other users. Or maybe not tell her and do it anyway. Card sorting it is really best done not with those who are experts in that area. Can I just ask, has anybody been involved or run card sorting sessions here?
I have a question. What's card sorting? Is it like stories? Like you have
No.
stories and
Well, if we follow on from the content area, with card sorting, we literally will take an audit of all the content for an app, a website, any type of interface, and we will lay them out as cards in front of participants who represent our users that we researched, and we'll bring them in one by one. And we ask them firstly to sort the cards into no more than, say, 10 to 12 piles, and they write on a sticky note the actual category name of that group of cards. And then we run another card sorting task where we take those same cards, shuffle them around, and then we produce those our own categories and say, can you do that task again? But group them under the categories that we've given you. And so what they tend to do is we can facilitate them. What happens is that we'll actually end up with all of the cards, and we will then group them according to, or cluster analyze them according to what where they group them. Just quickly go to this one. For example, some of the results from card sorting show us where all the clusters are happening. This helps us design navigation systems. There's no way you can design an intuitive navigation system if you design it with stakeholders. You must bring in the representatives of the users to come and sort 150 cards at a time, sort them into groups, and do it multiple times over and over, which will then allow you to then say, right, well, it seems obvious that these cards belong together. Let's look at some of the other results and see, well, what are those labels that they've used? And then we start to actually get the users to help us to decide what those labels will be on navigation systems, headings, etc.
Stakeholders will always sort the cards in the way that the business runs. So they'll look at it and they'll say, if it's a if it's a bank, they'll think about what all the different product streams are, and they might put, if KPIs for credit cards and personal loans are aligned, they'll put them together. From the consumer's point of view, credit card and personal loan, totally different things. Banks see them as either secured or unsecured lending. So, yeah, so if you allow the stakeholders to do it, and you will have seen it, you look at websites and the primary architecture is set up around the businesses. So that's not how users see. We don't know the business. It's not us. So stakeholders can be detrimental.
The question might be, well, how many participants do we need for card sorting? There's actually a magic number that's been floated around. Jeff Soro from Measuring Usability talks about 93 participants. 93 the amount of participants you need to achieve a confidence or error rate less than 10%. How do you get 93 people through? How do you get management to actually approve that? Well, I'll tend to do 5 face-to-face, and then I'll do 90 online to get that, or as much as I can. Any testing is good testing. It's better than no testing. it does, it helps you to put to bed those opinion-based decisions. I like to call it executive-centered design, where you'll end up with design decisions made by individuals who may not be close to the users or design focused. What they think, what they like, what they feel, what they believe, all of those things start to form their opinions, and they start to then affect the experiences that we end up delivering to users. Card sorting allows us to bring a report to the boardroom and say, thanks for that label you suggested. Can you see that no one worked hard underneath that? And I've had those discussions. You obviously have to be a bit more diplomatic than that, or not. But those conversations are great because you actually bring hard results to the designers, and to say, people that we brought in that represent our customers don't know what that label means. I really believe we should use the one where we have 33% of stuff sitting underneath. Conversations like that. And it's only then we can begin to design interactions. So when we talk about interaction design, we come to the other part of the process. What are we designing? There's a couple of things there. There's flows, how a user might flow through our systems, responsivity, adaptivity, wireframes. Wireframes we'll go through in detail for those of you who are uninitiated. And interactivity, what do they do? Do they click? Do they swipe? What gestures do they use to make things happen? And I always find parallels between the traditional architecture space, what Karen mentioned, and information architecture or interaction design. Architects don't do the building, they don't lay the bricks, but they sure need to know how those bricks hang together or what the texture should be. They need to know enough about building. They need to know about standards, they need to know about doors not opening in on each other, etc. All too often in the past we've been left with three, I hate to say, pretty mock-up that may have come through from an agency, and we've been left with the task of making it work. Stakeholders who perhaps haven't been initiated with users or exposed to them end up making up the flows as they build it, realising that some of the flows don't work, some of the logic is broken. What happens if this happens? A lot of that isn't considered, so it's often derailed by, I guess, aesthetics and other things that are only one small component of the user experience. A user flow, I'm sure you're familiar with what a user flow is. This is a typical one. This is actually one off an iPhone app in the early days, iOS 3. Sorry, iPhone 3. So we want to make sure we know the right logic, the right paths. We call this the easiest path of all, the happy path, or the primary user flow. But we also need to know what happens if this happens or that happens. I still know no better way to actually quote on a project or know how many screens need to be designed and hence developed than doing a user flow. Doing a user flow will actually make all these screens that you wouldn't have thought about just fly out at you. Everyone who's ever quoted on something and the stakeholders ask for, oh, can you just create a login screen? Yeah, there's a screen, 2 screens. When you do a user flow for login, you end up with about 5 or 6 screens. You've got forgot password, email verification screen, the thank you screen, all of those things. And user flows help us to really scope that out and understand all of those happy and unhappy paths or alternate paths. Here's a really favourite photo of mine. These are my friends over at taste.com.au that I've worked with. Who wants to take a guess at what we're looking at here?
Terms and conditions?
Well, it is news, so yes.
That's distressing.
That's their most popular recipe, zucchini slice, in case you didn't know. And that's the printer of zucchini slice, except no one thought about the flow of printing out zucchini slice with or without comments. Being the most popular recipe, it meant that it was the most commented on. There's some real gold in that. There's in those comments because there's foodies and non-foodies alike substituting ingredients. You know, what can I substitute zucchini for on zucchini slice? I don't know, or whatever, or cheese or something, or I don't know, whatever people substitute with meat zucchini slice. But that was just an obvious example. I took a photo of that because I was brought in to then design, after it had actually gone live, a way that we can give the user a choice of printing out with or without comments, show the number of comments just so they know that, well, without comments, how many comments am I actually printing, etc.
Just quick question, where does the recipe stop?
Awesome.
Yeah.
You print a page
I was going to say, I didn't think it
on
was a king slash, was that
That's
Amazon.
right.
When you print an Amazon page, it does pretty much the same thing.
But it's a news limited site, so I'm surprised the ads don't go. We're recording. Which brings us to wireframes, the other part of interaction design. The thing that most people want to get to. Yeah, thanks for the research, user stuff. Yeah. Show us the screens. I need to do this stuff before we get to the stuff that we all want to look at. Wireframes are quick and effective. I still believe to this day that they are the most effective and cheapest and most efficient way of actually communicating design. Looking at, getting an appreciation of how a screen will look, how it will present, what the interactions are going to be like. And it minimises any additional costs and time that are usually associated with not doing that, such as going ahead and doing visual design. Someone being engaged for a website project, diving straight into Illustrator or Photoshop. It's kind of madness. What are you designing? I remember the first year I do some lecturing at the Blue Design College. First year I went in there and I was meant to be teaching interaction design. I said, okay, we're going to go and design some wireframes. We're going to just design some screens. Everyone just fires up Photoshop. What are you doing? How do you know what we're going to be designing? We're going to be doing some flows. What are flows? Okay, so we have to come back to the drawing board and look at who are we going to be designing for? What were we designing before we even thought about colours, logos, typography, all those things. Wireframes are typically, for those of you who haven't been exposed to them, typically grayscale in colour, similar to the blueprints of a house. You know, your architect will do that. Your interior designer will then come in and do the magic. You know, different facades, different colours, etc., make the rooms really come to life, like a visual designer does. But the interaction designer or the architect will make everything work, present them in the right space, maybe even decide upon grid. All of these things are important. Some standard wireframes for its own. And we sometimes include colour because colour is still very important, particularly in a usability test when we use these wireframes, to see if there's comprehension or interpretation of a particular button colour. Does it give enough affordance for the user to think they're going to go forward or back or something pop up? We will use colours sometimes. We have different types of wireframes. We have low fidelity wireframes and high fidelity wireframes. That's as low fidelity as you can get. That's a sketch on paper. They work. Low fidelity works. But there are obviously advantages when we go to high fidelity wireframes. So low fidelity are good when you're looking at block diagrams or when you're looking for where you want your navigation system. You don't want to go into the detail, you just draw blocks up like that, or where you might, it could almost be like for developers here, it might be like a div plan or where things are going to go, what's the layout going to be, what grid is it going to follow. And certainly if you're designing a responsive experience, how that's going to equate to 1024, 960, 768, 480, 320, whatever those breakpoints you're going to design. Another example of low fidelity, we don't really know what the site does, but we can see the grid, we can see where things go. This gives us an understanding of how we might design it. Which brings us into high fidelity wireframes. This is an example, this is off taste. When we look at high fidelity wireframes, I argue the point that, just from my discussion with lead developers, etc., there's a lot of detail in there, almost enough for the developer to start building to a certain extent. They're not just blocks on a page or sketches with ad or logo or there's logo there, search. We actually design it to a level of fidelity that you can almost go ahead and build. And there are arguments now that this is too much detail. Those of you who've learned about the whole lean UX movement, where you're sketching and you've got the developer rubbing shoulders with you, that's great if they're in the same room as you, and that's great if they're UX focused. Not good if you've got an offshore agreement. Not good if you've got a developer in Melbourne, you're in Brisbane, and you've got a product manager in Sydney. So we won't really focus a lot on lean UX. There are some great advantages of lean UX where you don't go to this level of fidelity, but certainly there's some advantages to using this level of detail.
Probably just the bridge between those sort of in the agile environment, to UX, I've worked in Agile, I've worked quite a lot in Agile, and I find that once you get going and you develop that relationship with developers and VA, that you don't need to do a whole lot of the documentation anymore because your estimation sessions, everyone you would be familiar with Agile. So the estimation sessions take care of it, so that's kind of that bridge between waterfall and lean. And as you say, lean is, there's a lot of room for error in it. It can be nice if you're just scoping something out. Let's try it, let's see what we can do. But if you're going into launch, into production, then Agile's like that.
Yeah, I love Lean. I love Lean UX. I love Agile. I love teams. There's some really good ones. And I think it comes with, it's not as if you can just walk into it. It comes down to people stuff, right? It comes down to relationships. I know from a design perspective, I've gone to a point where I've had these amazing lead designers who I'll just go, I don't have to design all the alternate unhappy paths. Well, I trust these guys. They're good designers and developers. Guys, here's the happy path. I trust the frameworks that you have and all those things that you have in place, a style library. You're just going to run with it. Others, you have to go to this level because you don't know them, and based on experience that may not have gone so well. So I think it just comes down to relationships.
The longer you work with, for me, the longer I work with my development teams and VA, you're all in a team together, you get to the point where it's just take that, run.
That's right. And then I think the developers that I tend to have, it works two ways. They trust me not to go too crazy on something that goes outside the framework. They go, to the point where they're not saying, why are you designing something different every sprint? Why do we have a style library? We're just adding to the style library every sprint. That comes with a two-way thing. Is no, I'm actually going to stick to the style library working within those constraints. We'll stick to the components that have been set there for everyone to work with. It's really a two-way street. I think when you have that relationship, then good UX happens. You can't just have one or the other.
I've had developers come back and challenge me on my designs. It's like, I think there's a better way to do this. And if you have a good relationship, it's great.
Another high fidelity design. Stuff you don't see a whole lot of these days. Important to note, wireframes are not visual design mock-ups. We talk about visual design, colour, typography, imagery, texture, etc. They're not wireframes. Wireframes are, you can certainly put colour into them, but it's not where we're looking at the final product. I think that's where some of the confusion happens. If you look at any job ad on CCAD, I would dare say half of them on there today would have mixes of looking for user experience interaction designer must be able to HTML, CSS, must be able to create wireframes, do user flows, visual design mockups, pixel perfect, whatever. Unicorn. Cool.
Finance manager, stakeholder manager.
Pays $5,000 a year. When we look at wireframes, wireframes are a very good guide for visual designers. I've worked with some amazing designers. We have that type of relationship where I might leave something up to them, or they may go, no, what you've got there is good, you're following the grid, I'm just going to bring it to life with the colour. Here's a great example, one of Karen's examples, where you go from wireframe to visual design. You can see how much easier it is for visual designers when they're following something that's a blueprint or a path. The interior decorator isn't coming in and putting on a new room. They're just bringing that emotives, like that very important part of the experience.
I think what's really important is, a lot of the time UX is seen that we're trying to do everything, and I think what we're trying to say is that we're not trying to do everything. We're very heavily dependent on a visual designer. Because we create a wireframe, the visual designer brings it to life. Everyone in the team is absolutely necessary. So it's, we create wireframes and people don't love them. They love them on cards. But it's what we do.
So, wireframes, prototypes. I'd say they can be. We certainly use paper as prototype, and before interactive wireframes with usability testing, I'd be testing on paper. I'd be showing a user this. Now, where would you click? And they can sort of press their finger on where they click, and I'd take the paper out and put that on. Prototypes can be as low or as high fidelity as possible. It all depends on your needs, I guess is what this slide is saying. It's the paper prototype. find us? Anyone all comfortable?
That's why I cast it.
That's right. Or the left is that button.
It's like,
So you get the picture. That's a paper-based prototype using a phone placeholder.
other than paper.
We then come to the next level of wireframes, which are interactive wireframes. The point I want to make about interactive wireframes, those things that you can click, drop-downs appear, etc. And I might be classed as a heretic in our space, but I actually think interactivity is just another form of fidelity. We have low fidelity, which could be sketches, block diagrams. We have these high fidelity ones, which we showed you examples of. The interactive elements of it, the clickability, is just another level of fidelity that may or may not be required. They do take a little longer to create, but the advantage is that they simulate the look and feel of the final product. I would argue a lot better than a paper prototype does. And this is something that I say over and over again. It kind of makes sense to use something interactive to communicate interactivity. The example, the story I tell a few years ago, we were at a conference and we had a very well-known UX person from overseas come in to talk about communicating design for interactivity. It was 2006 and we were all wrestling with this whole Ajax thing and dragging and swiping and almost the stateful web. We were so used to designing for the stateless web. And we were sort of looking at different ways of comparing notes at this particular conference. And this person came out and then pointed to these little sketchbooks underneath our seats and started to give us examples to then go and sketch how we would do it. I was going, okay, this is pretty good. All right, so yeah, this is how we would do this, but still unknown. And that was it. The whole talk, he actually didn't give us anything. And I was thinking that he's struggling with it the same as we are. And I think back to that time of wondering whether, yeah, sure, there are some ways that we can over-document stuff by showing little fingers on our wireframes and showing what things click and how they slide. But what if it's all about, what if we needed something interactive to communicate interactivity? Hence clickable prototypes, which seem to be meeting that gap. There are a range of tools. Some of you may have heard of HRP, InVision. I'll just stand behind here before I say the D word. I've even seen that used. I don't use it. Karen does. At Xperity, we Azure users, Azure trainers as well. We train in this stuff. We get a host of developers, designers, teams coming out wanting to know how to prototype faster. Azure RP actually stands for Azure Rapid Prototype. That's our preferred tool of choice, although there are a number of other tools. I know developers who actually go ahead and they're faster at doing your ideas from sketch using Bootstrap or Foundation. They'll go ahead and use a framework to move to the actual prototype. Again, interactive prototypes allow you to simulate all that functionality. Rather than having to put an annotation, this is a drop-down. The drop-down actually works. It has real values. It goes to other pages. It fires up a light box. All of these things that are important. Here's just a video of an actual prototype. This is all wireframe stuff. This is built in Azure. This is knocked up in about 4 or 5 minutes. Next buttons. And this is something typically we would use with participants, test participants, take them through, see whether there's good comprehension on our labels, error rates, and all those type of things.
Stakeholders. They're trying to explain to a stakeholder what a flyout menu is without foreseeing it. And it's just, you can spend hours just saying, so if somebody presses that, this will highlight, another menu will come out here, and as soon as you put it into a prototype, it's, 10 minutes later.
This is another prototype for the touch and desktop experience we've been developing with client in Melbourne. This is for travel insurance in under 2 minutes on site at Melbourne Airport. And it's meant to simulate a touch experience, but we built all of this in Azure. And we're talking way before anyone has even touched a line of code or moved a single pixel in Photoshop. This is the advantage of prototyping. Tend to forget that text. That's what happens when the client doesn't give you all the copy. So we're simulating here what these kiosk machines are going to be like. And we're allowed to show the client before we went ahead, and engaged developers or whoever was going to come in and do the final experience.
I think the benefit as well if we get to code it, because we're designing in a static environment. We're not certain either. We want to be able to have something that we can interact with, because you start to fill something out and like, hang on a minute. And I find it really important when you're working on different devices. So if you're working on an iPad device, then you put the design on the iPad, and most people use their iPad sitting at home, lounged back. So you've got your prototype, you're sitting in position, hang on a minute, these buttons aren't in the right place. So and we wouldn't find that out until we had it built. So
the beauty about this, we can find out if traveling, you've got companies saying all these things about themselves. We can actually test whether participants can do this in under 2 minutes. Can they smash it right through and just get to the end and pay, give them a fake credit card number? The beauty about it is we don't have to build it or design it first, we just do the prototype and watch them use it. So the interactive prototypes really help us to look at, play with, feel, even measure the experience before it goes to production. There's also advantages for mobile devices as well. The point that I like to make is that it's such an advantage seeing the prototype with the right type size. All too often we're presented with these very beautiful retina-sized visual design mock-ups of the phone things, but they're not actually accurate. Is that font size going to be too small or not? We can actually test it on that. And we know from some well-known typographers that we don't use our computer like this. We certainly can use our phone like that or our tablet like that. So our type sizes can actually be smaller in some instances. And really importantly, you can never truly test and measure an experience until you're really mimicking it as closely as possible is what we're trying to say on that actual device. Watching someone with a device, observing them, scratching their head, looking for stuff, struggling. I know with my phone, and I have been guilty of this in the past, when I designed for a certain bank, the new account creation, where the bank wanted everybody to automatically select a debit card. Well, we talked about the hot zone, and the hot zone is certainly not here where you get carpal tunnel. You can guess where we put that button of, yes, I do want a debit card, right there, it's actually music, 70% of it is using it one-handed, and 90% are going to be right-handed. So, you can guess where we put that particular button, because we're designing the numbers, and we're designing for the actual device itself. They help us validate, which comes to validation is our last point we want to make. We test on users again, and usability testing is not UAT. It's not testing for functionality or how fast it is, because we're testing prototypes here. It gives us confidence. To quote Bill Buxton, we've got design is getting the right decision, prototyping is getting the design right. It allows us to iterate. This is the point we want to make there. We can iterate and iterate, rather than build and go, well, phase 2, which never comes right. My quote is, prototypes allow us to look at, play with, validate and refine before a single pixel is pushed in Photoshop, a single line of code. And that's very powerful, it's also very efficient. I'm having more and more developers these days inquiring about learning things like Azure and other tools, because they want to be able to play with it before they then go off and select the right technologies, the right code libraries, etc. for the actual interface. Azure, we're finding, is not just a design tool, it's popular amongst developers. This is my kettle. Why am I showing the kettle? Because I think I'm showing the importance of usability testing. In fact, one of my co-lecturers at Billy Blue has gone off to work for a very well-known kettle manufacturer. I'm inclined to have some words with it. It's a very beautiful kettle. It's glass and it's very nice, really nice shape. It comes off, it's wireless, etc. Sorry, cordless, whatever you call it. It gets a bit hard to hold when you've got lots of water in it. So yeah, it's very difficult to get leverage when there's a lot of water in it. The problem I have with this particular kettle is when there is a lot of water in it, you need to put your thumb over the top. Both my wife and I have burnt our thumbs on this damn thing. This very beautiful kettle that's evil on the inside because it tends to want to burn you. Because you can see over here, that's where the steam comes out when you're actually pouring the thing. And I just wonder how many people this particular company brought in to observe people, real people, using it. People in a rush who need to have their 3 coffees before they leave the door. Actually using it. Now, if we would think about this in user acceptance testing, does it boil water quickly? Does it not burn out? Does the glass not explode? Tick, tick, tick. We passed all the user acceptance testing stuff. Does it have a handle? Yes. Does the handle break or whatever? Yeah, great. That all works. But does it delight the user when they use it? Or are they actually fearful of getting a scolding whenever there's a lot of water in it? That comes from testing and observing users. And it's a real insight when we actually watch users. It's actually fascinating to see. When we talk about usability testing, we learn to know which problems to focus on. I've had instances where I am so happy with the designs I do. The client is over the moon. We're almost high-fiving each other. It's amazing. We get to usability testing, and users come in. I hate it. That's stupid. I would have left. And I think that's the beauty about usability testing. We are subject to our users. If they can't use it, then our designs are just worth just as much as that. Our users have to be able to use it and use it easily and perform really well. We're not asking them about colour preferences. I don't do that. Can you use it? Do you make the least amount of errors? And what is your time to completion? And if they are working well, I'm a happy person because those designs appear to allow them to complete their goals and stakeholder goals. So what are we measuring? Quantitative, qualitative stuff. I tend to measure time to completion, error rates. We can also measure eye tracking. I've just included a couple of interesting slides with eye tracking. If I just come back to time to completion per task, signing up. We have a prototype, we get the phone stopwatch, and we press start, and then we press stop once they've done. All we put down did not complete. And we do that user after user. How many errors do they make? If they're making 9 errors per task, on average 5 users are doing that, we've got a problem. We need to fix it. Or we can measure where their eyes are going with these eye calibration monitors. Here's the standard stuff that we know about this F shape. This is Facebook with eye tracking. These are special monitors that calibrate with the pupil to see where the eyes go. We talk about the F shape, where things go, and it helps us to decide where items are going to be placed, especially for long scrolling pages. This is an interesting one for the Special Olympics. There's a call to action over here, and you can look at the eye tracking results. They're not there. Anyone want to take a guess why? That's the big thing. That's what they want, but no one's going there. Either everyone goes use the tight ass and they don't want to donate, or possibly bad things happen with bread.
Carousel.
Could be a distraction, yeah, because they're certainly focusing on that. I tend to think that doesn't look like a button. It looks like it's part of the interface. So they're just going, oh, change lives and donate now. Thanks for telling me that. I can't do anything on there. It doesn't look like, it doesn't have high what we call visual affordance. Interesting one. Eye tracking, just interestingly, can be performed on print ads as well. Since, there was some testing done on the product, and they wanted to track, these particular advertisers wanted to track where the eyes were going. In the first instance, they found that everyone was looking at the girl and not so much at the product. They changed one component in the bottom quadrant, and look at the results that they got. This is when you got real hard measurement about human performance. how you can change design. We call persuasion design. We tend to follow where eyes are.
Yeah, right.
That's what happened to the last slide as well. The two guys playing something staring down.
Oh, they should be staring at the button.
That's what's wrong now.
They're looking at the heat map.
Very good.
Have you used mouse tracking?
Yeah, click egg and all
Does
those.
it work the same as?
I think where you click and where you look can be different, because you can certainly look first before you click. But any metrics is good metrics, is my opinion. You might have, I know that people ghost click, they sort of go and click on pages. Yeah. And you don't know whether that's just doodling with a mouse or whether they're actually hovering over something. Yeah. But I find click very good. In-page analytics for Google is okay. You've got to get your tagging right. Here's a really interesting one. Where do men look and where do women look? Karen, do you want to take this one? Well, where do men look? Funny enough, men still check out men, according to eye tracking. No one's shocked about the second one over here. But where do women look? Yeah, women look. This is all in general, of course. Please forgive the stereotyping here. Yeah, women still check out women, but we're seeing a difference here. What is the difference here? What are they looking for?
Is he married?
Which is why I asked you, because I didn't want to say that. That's a loaded question. But yeah, we see differences. It's great to be able to measure them. So I want to finish off with why we need research. The really important message here is we are not our user. And I know this may come up time and time again with your particular projects where we do guerrilla testing. And I know in a very large media agency, I had to use people in-house. I used anyone who I could get my hands on. If I couldn't get to the customer, I would use anyone. Of course, we test on each other. But we are not our user, and we need to understand our users' real-world problems. And we can understand this particularly by prototyping. We can firstly understand who they are, know what content they need, design that content to them, design a prototype, bring them in, have them tested, observe it, refine it, and then move on to all of those other things that we tend to focus on first, visual design and coding. So I'm hoping that the points that we've raised today really sort of drive that home, and particularly with the prototyping, I'd highly encourage anyone who's not prototyping at the moment to find the quickest way to prototype, whether you go with InVision or Exure, what we use, or whether you find yourself coding really quickly in a framework. Get that happening and get that prototype in the hands of the users and watch them as quickly as you can and as early as you can in the process, because the benefits really are huge. And that's the last slide I want to leave you with. When we look at our process, funnily enough, when we're either researching, designing or validating, the users are in the centre, which really illustrates user-centred design. Everything that we do puts them at the focus so that our experiences are optimised. Anyone have any questions at all?
Budget, how much normally do you see yourself on this website you spend for?
Look, it all depends. Sometimes you just work backwards from the constraints. If someone says, you've got a week, you just recruit like a mad person, five participants. I mean, Jacob Nielsen and co seem to think that you only need 5 people to uncover 80% of usability problems. If you can find 5 customers, recruit them, pay them $100 for their time, bring a report in, do a design, and you can do that in a couple of days.
Minimum viable research value is 1,000 people. Hands down, any research is not qualified unless there's 1,000 people involved.
Yeah, on a large scale. I mean, if you're talking very large size, but I've certainly uncovered some very, very significant usability issues with a handful of people. It all depends on how you recruit. Whether you take Nielsen's 5 person or not, whether you're an advocate, I think there's some real. I mean, any testing is better than no testing. I'd hate to think that someone wouldn't test unless they could come up with that magic 100,000, 10,000 participants. That would be critical mass.
given that one of the benefits of being a human is that we're adaptable and we're malleable and we'll develop our own mental models around what we're using, do you think that UX research is actually just an obnoxious way of jamming conversion down a user's throat and converting a six-figure salary as a UX expert?
Definitely not. Seven-figure salary, I would. No, honestly, I think most UX people that I've met tend to be advocates for the user and tend to not claim that they know the best way. I think when anyone says they know the right way for an interface, I immediately get warning signals, no matter how good a designer or developer they are. I approach every project almost convinced that I'm going to be persuaded by whatever research comes out. So there's a bit of humility for a designer to be a true human-centered designer, to actually say, I don't know this. So I don't know this. If I wanted to earn that salary, I'd certainly be going in saying, listen to me, I know this stuff, I've been doing this for 15 years. I wouldn't say that ever. So the users are at loss. So that would be my answer.
I had an example. I worked on a project for Nissan Motor Group, and we were putting a graphical interface over the spare parts of ordering system. It's an old green screen system. And one of the things that we learned through the research was that spare parts, people who work in spare parts, have this acquired knowledge over many, many years. And we found that we had to change the whole rollout plan of the interface. We couldn't go from a green screen straight to a GUI that anyone could use because we're diminishing the IP that these people have accumulated over 20 years, some of them. So Nissan, if we'd said, yes, we can optimize your interface, they probably would have lost a lot of stuff. They would have left and gone to another company. So our research can be so widespread in that we're finding out so many other things about the product, the company, people. So it's not just, can I use this, can't I use this? And I guess with contextual inquiries, which is one of my favourites, contextual inquiries where you go, and it's also called shadowing, which is a lot more intuitive term. You go and you watch someone doing something in their, in context of their environment. So if it's somebody working on the front desk at a hotel and you're building a new check-in system, you go and you stand behind them and you watch them and you see how many times the phone rings and how many guests come up and what happens with people's bags and what happens if somebody throws something over the counter. And you're just learning so much more. So you're able to walk through their shoes in a sense.
Just a question on products like Xero and Envision have a limited suite of interaction. How do you tackle when you might decide that a novel interaction is needed?
That's a really good point. I think I have this saying, step away from the prototype. I get, being a former developer myself, I tend to have to put tabs on myself and not going too far with the prototype and building in code. Because you can actually do that to make it work. I tend to come back to what's the purpose for that prototype? It's meant to communicate design. There's a library that kind of library that your Envision have. I usually go back to how I used to do it with paper. That you can actually, when you're bringing a participant or a stakeholder through, there's nothing wrong with saying, after they click something, then talking them through the next step. Say, okay, now from here, or having an annotation come up or whatever. If you can't do that, I have this joke that all Xero is missing now is the Center App Store. But we're not building the software, we're actually just communicating design. So I tend to go back to what I used to do with paper. You have to step away from it.
Over time, we see lots of different sort of best practices in design, and of course new technologies come along to sort of changes the way that we present certain things, or higher speed means that we're doing more video. So the whole thing's changed, and that would then change the way that we interact with it. So does that mean that therefore there is an expiry date on your UX? Does that constantly evolve too?
I think, yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think what you're talking about there is a form of determinism, that the technology would determine the interface. Now we've had advances in technology for the last, pretty serious advances in interface technology for the last 20 years. We could have argued that in 1993 on the Sun website, oh, well, this is now determined the way we're going to be doing it, so we don't need UX because we have all these component libraries. And I think if we ever thought that, we could be dead in the water, because we always have to think that the computer is not just going to give us the interface and we're just going to follow suit. We have now all the component libraries that we need, all the technology is there. We would always be finding different ways, different what we call experience gaps, with the amazing technology that we have at our fingertips at that particular point in time. And I mean, it would be great if that was the case, because then we could all sort of go fishing, I think, but I just don't think that we're there, and I don't think that we can.
Yeah, so it's like, drop-down menus and so on, is always there. So, but now it's an expectation that people have. So expectations completely change as well as time goes on.
Yeah, definitely. I think they've increased. I think gestures has totally thrown a curveball. We now have not just a click, right click. We now have all of these other things that we have to consider as part of our interface. I mean, it's already here, but it's not far from where we're going to have our touchscreen interfaces in the kitchen. We might be looking at the recipe, someone doing this, and whatever it might be. I think we're actually going to have to then go full circle again, standardise our gestures, and then go back again. And our components, and that's where developers and designers must work together, because that component library of any organisation or any group is critical to, firstly, rapidly prototyping, rapidly delivering, but at the same time that must be a living type of a component library, so that we can then say, okay, how can we always add to that so we're not stifled like that? I've certainly been in organisations where you can only design according to the component library, and I've come up with these wireframes. Users have smashed them, they've just gone right through them, usability testing, awesome, everyone's high-fiving or whatever. No, we don't do that. No, we cater for basics, and so no one does this, so we have to change it over. And that's why I hate to think we'd ever get to that.
Pizza has arrived, so please help yourself, grab another drink, play some pool. Next month we have New Relic coming over from the United States to come and talk to us about their product. We also have one of the developers from the Iconic coming as well, so make sure you come for that. Thanks for coming.
What's that? There's a lot of pizzas.
Oh yes, good access.
Oh. Pizza. Thank you. See it.